Great. Well, hello everybody. I'm Catherine from Student Services, and this is Erin from our USQ Law Society. We're very excited to be able to welcome you to our first joint event today. I'd like to especially welcome our panellists, Shanae Latigan from Clifford Gouldson Lawyers, David Rewo from Aiden Lawyers, Catherine Cheek from Cluett, and Bronwyn Herbertson from Herbertson Consulting. Thank you for giving your time today to come and talk to the students. In Toowoomba, students, if you would like to ask a question, please just raise your hand and I'll come over with the microphone. You do need to speak into the microphone so our online and Springfield students can hear your question. If you're at Springfield and have a question, please just let Stephanie know and she'll be able to submit that through to us via the online chat function. And likewise, if you are participating online. Before we get started, Erin will kick off with the first question, but before that, I would just like to ask our panellists to give a brief introduction, giving an overview of your career so far.
Thanks. Sure, well, I'll start because I'm sitting first. So my name is Shanae Latigan. Sorry, break the first rule. That's right. So I started my law degree actually at the University of Southern Queensland. I studied externally for probably about a year part-time and then decided that I wanted to give it my all. And so I transferred to Griffith's Gold Coast campus and studied full-time. After I studied law, probably it was in my last year or my second last year, I did a clerkship at King & Wood Mallesons. I was lucky enough, excuse me, to get a clerkship there. The clerkship went for about 4 to 6 weeks, as I can recall, after which you had to apply for the graduate positions, which I was then again lucky enough to get. So I worked as a graduate and then as a solicitor there for about 2 years, at which stage my husband and I decided to come back to Toowoomba, which is where we're from originally, to, I guess, come back closer to family. So my mum and sister and dad and everyone was here. So I then started probably mid last year working, or the year before last year, sorry, at Clifford Gouldson Lawyers in their construction and litigation team. So I mainly do construction law, and then every now and then I have to do some litigation stuff as well. And when I was at King & Wood Mallesons, I mainly did construction as well.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is David Rewo. I started studying at USQ, many years ago in the late 80s. I did engineering. I did associate diplomas in both mechanical and electrical engineering. At that time, it was my desire to get into, electronics. But after doing engineering and working in the field for a few places, I decided it wasn't quite for me, and I ended up getting into IT. I ended up working for the Canon dealership in town, and I stayed with Canon probably for about 15 years. I loved my time with them, had no regrets. But after I'd been with them for about 8 or 9 years, I thought, look, this is a great career, but it's not quite something I want to do forever. And I became very close with the Crown Prosecutor here in Toowoomba, and I got into law. I did my study through the Barristers Board. Now, probably, I guess it's not widely known the way that I did my study. Before the introduction of the Legal Profession Act in 2004, there used to be separate boards for solicitors and the barristers, and the Barristers Board had their own exams. It was a same curriculum as a university, meaning the course was broken into 4 years, and each year had exactly the same subjects as the university, but the Barristers Board did it internally amongst themselves. So that's where I did my study. After I finished my undergrad with the Barristers Board, I did a graduate diploma at the College of Law and got into the legal world in about 2007. I first started working at a firm called South Queensland Law, and then I went over to Aiden Lawyers in about 2008. And I've been there ever since.
Good afternoon. My name is Catherine Cheek, and my journey is a fairly straightforward one. I did law at the University of Queensland soon after I left school, and I've been in the industry ever since. I was fortunate enough to work as a judge's associate for a year, and I found that to be an excellent experience as far as seeing what the requirements were for court appearances. Gave me a lot of confidence in my own ability. Maybe that was misplaced at the time, but I didn't feel so daunted when I started my articles, and I was required to do my own court appearances. During the course of my articles, I was essentially left in charge of the personal injuries department in the firm, which was a largish firm in Brisbane. And so I just had to effectively work out how to run a department in my second year of articles, work out how to run files, who to get assistance from. And although it was a bit daunting, I just don't think I realised how complicated the job was. I just did it. And a lot of that experience has stood me in very good stead for the rest of my career. I've been working in personal injuries almost exclusively since until about 10 years ago when we returned to Toowoomba. And at that time, I took on an interest in litigation involving elderly people, because I found that when I came to Cluett Lawyers, we had quite a number of matters where elderly people had their funds transferred out of their own control into the control of other family members or friends of theirs. So I started doing as much litigation as I could to assist them in recovering the funds that have been transferred out, or the property that have been transferred out of their possession. And I'm still doing it, and I really enjoy that type of work.
Do I still need to use this, or should be okay? Hi, my name's Bronwyn Herbertson. I too went to study law as a mature age student. I had my first degree here in Bachelor of Arts in Media Studies, and then I decided to go into law. I studied externally with QUT. In those days there wasn't a law faculty here. I worked in private practice. I did my articles for 2 years and then worked for a while in private practice, but I quickly realised that wasn't for me, and I ended up working at what was then called the Toowoomba Community Legal Service. And after a few years there, I was lucky enough to be the senior solicitor for the Rural Women's Outreach Legal Service, and that was a great job. I got to travel around the whole southwest region giving free legal advice and representation to Aboriginal and rural women. So that was an excellent job for about 4 or 5 years. I did a lot of kilometres, hit a few roos, had a great experience. Then after that, I actually went off and worked in government and for other not-for-profit organisations for a number of years. So, yeah, that's, I guess, in a nutshell, is my background in law.
Yep. So we'll start the questions now and I'll get the ball rolling. So why did you choose the legal profession? It hasn't already been covered in your introduction.
When I gave my rundown about what I was doing before in IT, I forgot to mention something. I used to do a lot of sideline work in nightclubs, working in the club out here and also in the club downtown. It was just a bit of extra money that I used to put aside to basically get myself overseas once a year. But working in nightclubs, I'd always go to court every year as a witness, because we'd see some type of fight and the people would call me as a witness to give a rundown of what I saw. When I was in court, I used to see these chaps with funny little wigs arguing a case. Now, with the barristers, sometimes we saw very good barristers that were very competent. Sometimes we saw some that were not so good. But I guess it was always interesting for me, because I thought, look, all they do up there is stand and argue. I thought, I can stand and argue. Yeah, I can do that. So that's why I got close to the Crown Prosecutor to find out how he got into law. But it was basically, I guess, seeing people in the legal profession in work arguing cases that I found quite appealing. I like the idea of, the adversarial system where there's two different sides and presenting the evidence to try to come to a common agreement. But it was seeing court cases in action that prompted me to get into law.
When I was living in London, I decided I didn't want to be a nanny or work in a bar, which most of my Australian friends were doing one or the other. So I did a short course and became what they call over there an outdoor clerk. So worked for a small law firm in Finsbury Park, and the job was to take the files to court to brief the barrister, take notes. And one day they sent me to Pentonville Prison, which I'd known from the Monopoly Board, and I got to interview a person being held on remand there, and I think from that day on I was hooked.
My journey is a bit different in that both of these guys, their experience or their want, I guess, for law came from a practical perspective. For me, I started studying a Bachelor of Business. After school, I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. My dad put some pressure on for business because that's the faculty that he was working in here at USQ. And I thought, well, for lack of wanting anything else, I'll do the Bachelor of Business. And then there was a law introductory course in my business degree that you just have to do. It's part of the core courses. And I just thoroughly enjoy it. I remember it was the absolute first time it came across in my second semester that I wanted to do an assignment, and I put extra effort in. I found myself at the university library, looking up, researching books and reading cases. And when I ended up doing quite well in that one subject as opposed to any of my other business subjects, I think that's the point where I sort of thought, look, this is definitely something that I enjoy. And then, so I guess that's the theory side of it. But I must say, if you enjoy studying law, I think you'll find that actually working in the legal career, it's much more rewarding and it's even more fun than that first assignment that I did.
Well, I started off doing journalism because when I left school, I just decided I wanted to go to University of Queensland. And so whatever score I got was going to be used to get me to the University of Queensland. And I decided to start an arts degree, which is where journalism was. And I did a year of that and decided I couldn't face doing that for the rest of my life. So I changed to law, and I found that quite an interesting area to study. I didn't have as great an experience with my law degree in the sense that there were plenty of subjects that I thought, if I never have to read this again, that will suit me fine. But once I got out of the university, I found working in a law firm to be just thrilling, because I was working in a pretty dynamic department doing litigation, so it was exciting. It was deadlines and excitement and staying back and working as a team and all the things that really appealed to me. So that my real passion for the law started as soon as I entered the workforce, and that has continued. I'm still doing those sort of things, and I'm still getting a lot of reward from that.
So as a bit of a follow-up, we do have a question from Springfield campus or online. So was there a particular area of law that you were interested in, and that sort of sparked your interest in working as a lawyer? And if so, are you still working in that area?
I thought, because I thought I'm a nice person, I'm really compassionate, I will do really well in family law. And I did that for about 6 months, and I realised that I was just completely the wrong person to do family law, because those who are empathetic towards their clients tend to get frustrated. It's a difficult area, and there's a fair bit of management of clients' expectations involved in that. So I found that moving into areas which still required me to be very empathetic with my clients, but didn't involve this incredibly intense emotional involvement between my client and another party, which is what happens in family law. I found that suited me better.
For myself, litigation. I knew from the very moment that I got into law, litigation is where I wanted to be. And I think, like Catherine said before, there's a lot of enjoyment to come from it, with deadlines and working complex cases. But the one thing that I need is I like some type of confrontation and resolving that confrontation. Others in law, I mean, it's not for everybody. Others in law, like rules in state, like drafting documents or tax, giving advice. So I think with law, there's something for everybody, and it's important to work out what makes your fire glow hotter. But for me, yes, I definitely liked the litigation, and that's what I started when I got into law, and what I've been doing ever since.
I agree with your comments about. I worked predominantly in family law, domestic violence, and child safety, and it is interesting because the very people that are drawn to work in those areas are probably the ones that get the most burnt out. And a lot of my friends who were working in that area at that time are no longer working in that area because it can be very taxing, and as much detachment as you think you've developed over the years, it can wear you down. But I will also say I thought it was an incredibly rewarding time in my life, and I know that I helped a lot of people. But yeah, it's a difficult area to work in.
Look, I never really had any idea which area I wanted to go in throughout university. Some courses I enjoyed more than others. I ended up, I think, enjoying constitutional law and those sorts of subjects more, which is just absolutely not the area I ended up working in. When I started at King & Wood Mallesons, you do a rotation program. So I did various rotations through their project team, their litigation team, and it wasn't until I started in their construction team that I absolutely fell in love and knew that that's what I wanted to be doing in terms of law for the rest of my life. It's got just the right balance between front-end work, which is the drafting and the reviewing of documents and assisting with tender preparation and so on, and then the back-end side, which is the mediation and the negotiation and the courts, if all else fails.
So for students who have absolutely no idea what area of law they want to study in, how do they find out what area might interest them, and when do they have to decide?
That's a golden question, that. What to do. And for me, I know when I did the graduate diploma in legal practice, there's a portion of that where you have to spend time in a law firm. And I'd say that if you don't have an idea in terms of what you want to do, when you're doing that practical experience, in a law firm, just try to speak to the different people and try to, get your fingers in as many pies as possible to see what you like, what you don't like. As I mentioned earlier, there's so many different types of law. There's something out there for everybody, but it's very important to find something that you like. I think we've seen stories of, or we've all studied with someone who ended up getting a career that just was not for them, and they ended up getting out of the legal industry. So I think it's very important to find out something that you like. How to find that? That's the challenging question. So I would recommend when you're doing if you do graduate diploma in the practical experience, just try to, sample as many different areas as you can to see, what takes your fancy.
And following on from that, probably trying to get those work experience in firms that has the practice areas that you think you might like to do. So if you want to have some experience, in workplace and litigation, don't go for a firm that does just family law, because obviously that's going to be very limited what you can and can't do then. So you have to, research all the firms and look at the sections that they have, and then following on from that, just try and do as much work from as many various departments as you possibly can. And you'll quickly realise which ones you like and which ones you don't.
Yes, I think you just have to try a few things on for size and see if they fit you. There's no way, I think, that unless you have a particular interest in something that involves drafting or perhaps tax law, that you might know then that that's where you want to go. But I really think you just need to try a few things and see which fits you best.
And one great way to get experience when you're a freshly minted solicitor is to volunteer at community legal services. So they're all over Australia, and there's many different services. And I just know when I was a law student, when I looked back, I thought, why didn't I even know these existed? It just didn't form part of our law degree at all. And but the experience you can get, and you can taste all different types of law as well. So wherever you end up, even if you're working in private practice, keep in mind they often have pro bono clinics at night time, but it's also a great start to start working in any community legal service if you do want to have different experiences in the law.
Actually, that's a really good segue for something I was hoping to get a chance to say. Even if you're not admitted, there may be opportunities for you to do community legal work as a student. And I volunteer at the Homeless Persons Legal Clinic, and they operate a clinic every Wednesday down at the base. And there would be no reason why arrangements couldn't be made for students to come down and volunteer there with a solicitor as well, and get some exposure to the type of incredibly complex legal issues that arise at the Homeless Persons Legal Clinic. Because many times as a lawyer, the problems that you're presented with will not necessarily require a legal answer. They are problem solving generally. Now, you may have a legal answer, but that might not be the best fit for the person you're talking to. So to get some experience in hearing what people's lives can become, how complicated they can become, and how many legal problems they can have at one time, it's a great opportunity.
I guess leading on from that, question to the panel is how do we as law students get a foot in the door in the legal profession, or how do we obtain a job post-grad as well? Drawing on your experience.
Well, one of the hats I'm wearing at the moment is as the president of the local law association, and we have quite a number of functions throughout the year, and your law association is notified of those events. I would encourage you to come to as many of those as possible. We can and have got student rates to attend those events, and if you are able to come, you will be able to meet local practitioners, and I really don't think that there's any substitute for talking to people who are already in the profession, making yourself known to them, because then if they know that you're looking for work, or if you apply to them in writing, they have a face and they know something about you already, and that is such an advantage that I couldn't even tell you what percentage advantage that is, because they know something about you already. They already know what you like doing. So there's a significant relationship already started.
Just on what Catherine said then, I'd like to follow up and say you can't put a value on networking. My two jobs at South Queensland Law and at Aiden Lawyers, I both got those jobs and I never even had a resume. I got it from networking. At South Queensland Law, I built a relationship with one of the principals of the firm there at a school function. And I was doing this all the time, speaking to not just this one particular chap, but many people. But with this one particular fellow, I built a relationship at school. This was 6 months before I even needed the job. And then when it came time for a job, it was simply a matter of a phone call saying, look, following up on the conversation, are we in a position to do something? And then with the job at Aiden Lawyers, and it was exactly the same thing, except that in that particular job, I got it at a luncheon we went to. And I got very close with the principal of the firm at this luncheon, and after many drinks, we were telling all sorts of stories. But it built the relationship that we could build on, such that, 6 to 12 months later, when I needed another job, and it was just simply a matter of a phone call to saying, hey, look, I am blah, 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 and we ended up getting the position. So I think it's invaluable networking. And it doesn't have to be selling. You don't have to be selling yourself or anything like that. It's simply just working on the contacts, knowing who's who in the industry, introducing yourself, such that they become familiar with yourself. I mean, if you try to sell it and they don't have a position, you'll just annoy people. But if you build, some type of relationship with them so they know who you are and you know who they are, then if an opportunity does open up further down the path, it's so much easier to get your foot in the door.
Yeah, I guess, and following on from that, I 100% agree. There's no doubt that it's extremely competitive at the moment, and it's really difficult to get jobs. And we receive, thousands of resumes with all the same information. Everyone's got good grades. Most people have volunteered at some point or another, and most people have worked as well before. So when everyone sort of ends up, I guess, looking alike on their resume, what do you do to set yourself apart? I've always been the type of person that meets people face to face. So it's actually very rare. When I applied for my clerkship the first time, I applied like all the other students for all 10 or 12 top tier firms, and I didn't hear back from anyone. And I then made phone calls to each and every single company that I applied to sit down and have a coffee, obviously my shout, to just go through and so that they can give me some guidance so that I could know for next time. Based on those coffees, I think I had about 4. And then the next clerkship position that came, which was the winter, June, July, I got 3 offers for clerkship. So there's no doubt in my mind that the only thing that really changed was the fact that that HR person that ended up reviewing my resume remembered me, remembered that 30-minute coffee that we had. I'd obviously made an impression on them and not on the fourth one. And it's based on that I then got the clerkship. And then when I took the King and Wood Mallisons one, I actually had asked the HR staff, Alanda, whether that was it, and she confirmed that it was. And she said that was great initiative and no one had ever done that before, because most students just think, I wasn't successful, what else can I do, instead of taking that time. So I would recommend, if there's an area that you're really interested in or a firm that you would like, I guess, to get some experience in, email the HR staff responsible or a director if you know them, and just say you just want to have a coffee, you want to have a general chat, let them meet you, see what you're about, perhaps offer a free work experience. You never know, there might be a trial that's coming up and they might need you for due diligence, and it might be suitable. It might not, but in 2-3 months' time, they might remember you and give you a call. And in any event, when you've met them, if that name passes on a resume piece of paper, they'll make that connection. And if you made an impression on them, that carries its weight in gold, I think.
I have a question. We have a lot of mature age students or students studying online who are balancing their studies with full-time work and families, and some of the things that I hear is, how do I do these things to make myself more employable when I have all these other things that I'm trying to balance in my life? What advice would you give them?
Are we talking about the networking or how just in general?
Yeah, general, how, with work experience particularly, how do I do work experience when I'm working full time? I don't have the time. How would you prioritize it, and what advice would you give to those students in that kind of position?
Look, I think for myself, it's all about routine. I know when I was doing my study, I was still working full time at the same time. And then when I did the graduate diploma and I had to do whatever it was, 16 weeks in a law firm, I still had a mortgage. I had bills to pay, putting my child through school. So what I ended up doing was just simply working out a routine whereby I could do 5 days a week, 3 days, if that sort of makes sense. So I'd work longer on those days or work back or come in early. But that's just the routine that I got myself into. And the same was with study. I knew, I guess I set myself a goal that I wanted to get through the study in a certain period of time. And then I just worked backwards. I said, well, what do I need to do to achieve this? And then I set myself a routine. So I'd study certain nights and on the weekends for a particular amount of hours. And I kept to that, like clockwork. Now, obviously things come up, birthdays, functions, what have you. So you can't keep to it all the time. But I think a routine is vital. And I think also if you've got partners, then they become a little bit more accepting of the long hours that you have to put into this. If they know on particular days you're going to be spending massive hours, but then, on certain days you can do other things, then they are a little bit more agreeable to what you have to do. But for me anyway, it was very much a routine, get yourself in a routine, so at least you know what you need to do to achieve that goal, and that you can manage your work, because obviously with a lot of mature age students, they've got bills. You've got to pay the bills to, I guess, keep the roof over your head. And at the same time, you've got to try to manage the study. So all you can do is focus, well, what do I need to do to achieve this? And set up a routine and then keep to that routine the best you can.
I think it's worth acknowledging here that you can't have it all. Whoever tells you that, it's just not true. And you actually have to make sacrifices and decisions. And it's not always easy. And having said that, sometimes you put in the hard work and you can get to a place where you can work for someone who's got family-friendly outlook. So, for example, by the time I was admitted and was working for a female lawyer in town who had her own practice, she allowed me to work 9 to 3, so I was able to pick my son up from school. I was a single parent, but to get to that stage, I had to make huge sacrifices. So, for example, on my son's first day at school, in grade 1, I was in the district court in Brisbane. And, I think you've got to acknowledge that if you really want a career in the law and you want to get somewhere, you're looking at long hours, you're looking at having to make a choice. And it's not always rosy, but that's the reality of it. Having said that, and I've also got another friend who's very high up as a senior litigator in Brisbane, and she's now working 3 days a week to spend more time with her family while they're still young enough to want to spend time with her. So yeah, I think it's no point sugarcoating it. It's tough, and something has to give.
Yeah, I agree. It's about prioritising and working out what you want and how much you want it. And if you want it badly enough, then you will find the time to do it. You will give up something. Something will have to go that you are already devoting time to. And I know that sounds like it could be impossible if you are already working and raising a family. My life is completely taken up already. All my time is completely absorbed by these activities I'm already doing, but you will find that you can do things differently that enable you to find a spare hour or two at a time for your study. It might mean getting up earlier. It might mean doing it at a time when children are in bed. But you will find, if you want it enough, you'll be able to find the time to do it. And you will just have to let things that are not directly relevant to the things you have to do in your life, they just drop away for a period of time, not forever, but a period of time.
And I guess be strategic about, I guess, what you can and can't do. So, for example, if you're working full-time and you've got a family and you have limited time available to you, think about what it is that you can do and what's going to be most beneficial. So that might be, I guess, attending networking events that you'll get the most out of. So I know if you're in the Gold Coast or Brisbane or those are the two I know. There's usually, I think, twice a year networking events that's called speed legal or speed networking or something along those lines. It's about an hour and a half, and there's 10 tables. On each table, there's about 7 solicitors or barristers or judges or a combination of those, where students can then go in and then like speed date, but you're obviously not dating, you're just trying to schmooze them and get a job out of it. Yeah. Something like that is absolutely invaluable, and that's 2 or 3 hours on one night. So do something like that where you know you're going to be able to make an impression, get some cards. You then follow that up by email. And I guess strategically that might be much better than perhaps going to an event where there's just a speaker and you're mostly listening. And I'm not saying that that's not beneficial, but if you had to choose, I think an event where you can actually chat face-to-face with someone and you have that opportunity to connect and impress, that's the better one to choose then. So I guess strategically think about, which ones are better than others to go to.
Yeah. So we have some more questions from Springfield. So for those who are interested in honing their advocacy skills, what opportunities do you know of that are available at the bar?
You knew the crowd.
Look, I mean, that's a difficult one. When I speak to a lot of barristers, and when you become I'm not too sure if you're familiar with the process. I think when to become a barrister, you do the same study that you do to become a solicitor, and then you do have to do another course on top of that, a 6-week course at QUT, which is basically like a barrister's practice course. And then you become a pupil to a more senior barrister for 2 years. And after you done your pupillage, you can go off to the real world and defend cases all you want. But the one thing that barristers have always said is, how difficult it is to hone their advocacy skills. And what most of the stories that they've come across is that, look, they try just to do as much criminal work as they can. Now, this is even with like litigation barristers in civil matters. In civil matters, knowing the rules of evidence and things like that and being able to argue these points, you need to be able to practice these skills. And with the criminal work, it's very much like a sausage mill where they come in and they come out, and 90% of your work will be doing pleas or mitigating pleas, but it does get you in front of a court so you can practice these things. Now, in terms of how that applies to students, it's difficult because there's no free mechanism by which you can go and stand before somebody and argue. But I would say, look, just identify, what opportunities you had before you. And like when I was talking about the barristers before, they've identified criminal matters, the easiest way for them to hone their skills, because there's so many of them. They're always there. People are always urinating and getting into public nuisance on the weekends. So there's all these cases that they can appear for. So it's up to you. But, I'd say any court work is great experience. The more times you can appear before a magistrate or a judge, the better it is.
I might just add to that a little bit, just with if you're wanting to get advocacy skills, then the Law Society actually has its own in-school mooting competition, which is great experience. But we also send teams to state and national mooting competitions as well. And so if you're interested in that, then I would suggest emailing the Law Society and we could talk to you more about that. And that's just a practice of skills. It might not be the same as standing up in front of a judge, but it is still very much the same set of principles, and it is really great experience as well.
100%, I agree. And I know that there's also like state and national competitions for client interviewing and negotiation and all those sorts of ones. And they're all good because you're getting up in front of someone under pressure and you just have to sort of make it up as you go and I guess be persuasive as possible. So yeah, any of those ones would be a good starting point if you're a student.
Also, working as a solicitor in a community legal service, we very rarely could afford barristers. Sometimes we would get some to do the work pro bono, but mostly we were representing clients ourselves. So I got to run full-on trials in mags courts matters, in the family court jurisdiction, and do a lot of representation. So that's something else to think about if you are interested or want to give it a go, is to look at working for a community legal service. The other thing I'd suggest, I spent 5 years on the Health Practitioners Review Tribunal. So there's lots and lots of tribunals. Now, I just entered an ad in the paper that was looking for lay people, lay assessors, we were called. So we sat with judges and on matters, and that particular tribunal was looking at disciplinary matters for health practitioners. But there are many tribunals. I've got a few friends who are solicitors and spend most of their time hearing QCAT matters in Toowoomba. So that's also another way, because it's really interesting from the other side of the table how much you can really learn about advocacy when you're actually in the assessor's role.
So we did have another follow-up question to do with that, and that's any thoughts on life as a Queensland solicitor as opposed to that of a barrister, in particular with lawyers seem to deal more with administration, barristers might go to court more. So how have you found this and what is your experience here?
Well, the difference between a solicitor and a barrister tends to be advocacy. That is correct. What the work the solicitors find is that we deal with a smaller number of matters in greater detail. Barristers see a larger volume of different matters, but they don't have to get into the detail of the case to the extent the solicitor does. The solicitor will know everything. Not everything is going to be necessary in a court presentation or a mediation or a settlement conference. Our job is to do an assessment of what evidence is needed to present the case in its most successful manner, and having made that assessment, that's what we pass on by and large to the barrister. So our job is evidence gathering, assessment of the issues, and to use this enormous chunk of information that we get to hone it down and down and down till we have the best, most succinct case that we can present.
And I think another thing to remember, the difference between if you're thinking about a career as a barrister or as a career as a solicitor. When you're a solicitor, you work at a firm. You know, people knock on your door, ring in, and they come and see you and they give you instructions. Barristers predominantly work on instructions from solicitors, which means if you want to become a barrister and you open up, your doors to become a barrister on one particular day, you sit and wait for a solicitor to contact you and give you a brief. It's not something that you can go out and market yourself like the way solicitors do. So when I was studying, I mentioned earlier about studying the Barristers Board, it was initially my, desire to go over to the bar. But speaking to many solicitors, I began thinking, well, look, I just do not have the contacts within the legal industry, that if I was to become a barrister and I open up my office one day, who is going to come to me? Who was going to brief me? I just didn't know enough people. So I think these days you find quite often the barristers have been solicitors for many years. They've worked at firms, they've built out contacts, they've become known by their peers, such that when they do become a barrister, the solicitors know, I know Bob Smith, he's a good fellow, I'm going to send him a brief to do X, Y, Z. So it's a little bit more of a fundamental difference between the barristers and solicitors is how they get their work.
And then I guess following on from that, a large part of working as a in a private firm, for example, like Clifford Gilton Lawyers, as a solicitor, is that you sort of get the whole package experience. You go from that first phone call from the client where they are rambling and telling you so many different stories that you don't know which one to tag on to, right through to getting them into that first interview, honing those skills of being able to know what questions are the right ones to ask, getting down to what really the issues are. You have opportunities early on to draft correspondence, to try and settle the matter, to negotiate it. If that doesn't end up, I guess, happening, you then have the conversations with them about risks if they go to court, what court would mean, what the adverse costs effect are. So it's a whole larger scale of things that you'll end up doing with that client. You then, and I often do, I still draft court proceedings, so I still draft claims and statement of claims, defences, counterclaims, all those sorts of things. But we often get a barrister to settle it because they have that technical and expert, I guess you could say, skills. And so then, I guess so that's something to note of. When you're a barrister, it's like you said, your client is the solicitor and you get fed all the information from them. And by and large, your role is to, on the day, advocate for your client, for your client's client, so for the plaintiff or the defendant, to the judge, which in itself is a complete skill and not something that anyone can just stand up and do off their feet. Whereas the solicitors very much do have that day-to-day conduct of the file. You're responsible for staying within the fee estimate that you've given the client, billing the client, chasing that up if you have to. And so I guess touching on that administrative perspective, it certainly is there, but there's much more to it. There's the drafting of correspondences, negotiating, and doing all sorts of other things.
Yep. So we have another question from online. Is there any hints or tips that you have learnt through your university journey or career that you think would help us through university or our future career?
If you're asked to do something and you're given an opportunity, say yes, because you will do it at least as well as any other person and possibly better, and you will always learn something. Even if it turns out to be a complete disaster, you will learn something from that. So don't be shy and accept any opportunity you get.
Ask lots and lots and lots of questions, because it's so scary. I guess, just remembering back to being a student at university, getting an assignment and not even knowing, what certain things mean. Go around, ask people, ask your lecturers, etc. Go to the books, do some research. But when you're actually in a law firm and you start off, it's absolutely scary. It's one of the most scariest things that you'll go through. It's such a foreign concept. It's nothing like studying at university and getting that perfect case example where you do a couple of key searches and the case pops up and you've nailed it 100% on the assignment. It's so different. So I've just always found that there really, really is no such thing as a stupid question. Ask as many people as you can, as many questions as you can. People tend to want to help and they tend to want to be really helpful, and that's where you draw most of your knowledge from. Instead of spending hours and hours trying to research something, ask someone, where would you start? Where do you think, would be the best place for me to look at? And people don't mind that, and that'll just save you hours and hours.
Yeah, look, I'd say that as well. Never be afraid to ask a question. You'll find that even in the profession, and like this happened to us just last week, that this one particular case came to us and we went, I have no idea where to start with this. So we call up a barrister. The barrister says, I have no idea where to start on this. Then we get into a QC. The QC said, well, I know 6 times in Australia that this type of case has happened. So, but there was an instance where, we're in the industry all the time, but something comes and we have no idea. So you just got to ask questions, jump on the phone, speak to people. I think that's the same when you're a student. Ask questions. No one's going to think anything less of you if you put up your hand and say, look, why is this? Why is this? So always ask questions.
Yeah, I agree that the study of law is very different from the practice of law. They're two totally different things. So you could be a brilliant law student and you could make a pretty bad solicitor, and conversely, the other is the same as well. Because there's other skills you need to work as a solicitor or barrister that you probably are not going to get taught in your law degree. So I guess I'm saying that for people who maybe are not getting the marks that they want, it doesn't mean you're not going to make a fantastic professional once you graduate. I remember doing corporations law and getting 55%, and I was talking to my friend who was already a solicitor on the phone, and I said, oh, God, I got 55%. She said, well, you studied 5% too hard for that subject, didn't you? So, don't despair. And conversely, doing property law and then actually when I was doing my articles, realising I had learnt none of it, none of what actually was needed to do a conveyance in those days anyway. It was the legal degree was very, very, very theoretical. So I could tell you the cases, but I couldn't actually tell you how to fill out a Form 24 or a transfer document. So, just to keep positive and I guess until you get that practical experience, you're not going to know if, number one, you're good at it, or number two, if this is exactly what you want to do.
I just want to go back a step to, Shanna, you mentioned you were successful at getting a clerkship and you had met with the recruiters there. What did you actually find out in those meetings that you had with her or them about what it is they're actually looking for from the applicants for those kinds of positions?
Yeah, sure. So look, they're definitely looking for certain things to be in your resume, and contrary to popular belief, it is 100% not your GPA. One of the guys that I clerked with had a GPA of, I think, 4.7, which, I think back then I thought would never get in, and he was a clerk and then ended up being a graduate. So I think the sorts of things that she mentioned to me that they look for is work experience that you've had. And I remember at the time and throughout university, I worked at McDonald's, at McCafe, and I 100% did not put that into my resume. And she said to me that's one of the biggest mistakes that I made, because they just want to see the length of period that you've worked for. They want to see that you, you're loyal to a certain employer. So the fact that I had worked there from the start of since I moved to the Gold Coast right through until that point, they could see consistency, etc. They want to see that you can juggle. So the fact that you're not just at university and studying and getting whatever grade it is, but the fact that you can also work and do two things at once was invaluable to them, which is not anything I thought, of when I didn't put McDonald's into my resume. So remember that was something they really, in the actual question, which I guess she told me to put my hobbies into my resume, which I ended up doing. And then it was really interesting in both my clerkship interview and my graduate interview. They just hone in on your interests, which is phenomenal. But the reason they do that is because it's all about culture. They actually don't assess you for how smart you are on paper or what a good paper you did back in year 2 or whatever. They're all about, this is what our firm is about. This is the type of people that we like to employ. And are you going to fit into with that culture? So if you're all about sports, drinking and having fun, Mallison's was the place to be. It was an absolute phenomenal culture in that respect. So that was definitely another thing, is your hobbies, and not just, being, I get a bit blasé about it, like traveling, like actually going into a bit of depth and perhaps saying what you have or haven't done in regards to those hobbies. What were some of the other things? So hobbies was a big thing. Your work experience was massive. And I think that's the only things that I remember now. And there was a complete different way of how you had to set out your resume. So certain things that you had to cover in a certain manner. I just remember it was, my first resume was sort of one that I'd handed into McDonald's. And then my second one ended up being like a pro forma one, which she gave me an example of, and I just had to follow that to the T, put in all that information that they asked for. Or if you've ever done any exchange programs, they're massive about multiculturalism in Kingwood Mallison. So the fact that I could speak 2 languages, Afrikaans and English, that was a big draw card for them. And I think most of the students that I ended up getting a clerkship and graduate position with either, was originally from another country, or they'd done some traveling, or they'd done exchange programs, etc. So that was a big thing for them as well. And then I remember the cover sheet, you had to write a cover letter in front of your resume, and they looked for key things there as well, which is all those things that's in your resume that I just hit on, but just drawn and highlighted, I guess, for their attention, so that they can just quickly read it, tick, yep, so they've done this, got this, great, and then they'll review the resume. Otherwise, they won't even look at it.
And the interview process is quite different as well, isn't it? It's not necessarily behavioural-based questions. It's more...
It was insane. It's one of the questions that they asked me was if I was a perfume, what flavour would I be? And I can't even remember the answer that I gave. And the other question they asked me was if I won $1,000, what would I do? And I just opened my mouth and said I'd go to a beauty spa. And after that, I thought that's probably the worst answer anyone could have gotten given, but it ended up obviously not being. So yeah, so it's completely different. They never once asked me, I guess, whether how I would prioritize a task or my communication skills. They didn't put me in any difficult sort of what would you do scenarios, because I'm terrible at those. It was really about culture. It was trying to see, would I fit in? What was I about? How do I respond, I guess, to certain questions, and how do I behave when I respond to something that I'm not sure of, or, you know, when they ask me something that I think is ridiculous, do I roll my eyes or do I still conduct myself in a professional manner? It was all about those sorts of things, as opposed to, like the typical interview questions that you'd expect.
Which I guess is what that networking aspect of it is trying to find out as well.
100%.
Back to that point.
If you're a good fit for a firm and they can see that, if there's a position, you know, they'll try and get you in, I think. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
I know we touched on it a little bit, but I'm in my final year and I've got a few people studying that are applying for clerkships in Brisbane and Sydney and Melbourne. Myself personally, I'm going to be staying in Toowoomba. I want to work in Toowoomba. I don't ever plan on leaving Toowoomba. But you can't find the same similar opportunities online. And I know you've said that we should network, which very happy to come along and do all those types of things. But how do you then find out about graduate opportunities? Are there some available in Toowoomba? Should we just be asking the question? Yeah.
Look, I would definitely say that the best way that you're going to get that information is by having that coffee I spoke about earlier. So, for example, at Clifford Gilton Lawyers, I know that we get clerks during the second or last year. I don't know. Simon's one of them. What is it? Your second? So we get clerks that start working part-time with us then, and then based on that and whether there are positions available at the end, we make the offers and then they stay on usually. So the only way you would know that, I think, I don't know, how did you find out about it? That's probably a better question for you. Sorry.
How did I get
How did you find out about the clerk? Yeah.
I just got asked by Danny Clifford, one of our directors, one time if I would be interested in the role.
Okay.
Through networking.
Through networking. So excellent. So look, I guess I don't think we've widely advertised it because we would be inundated with applicants. So I think it would be through that networking. But you would most certainly, the moment that you sit down with Anne-Marie, who's our HR person, she would say to you exactly what opportunities we are, when you should start looking at them, what you would need to do to, I guess, get into those positions. That's when you might be able to flag that you might have 2-3 weeks over the holiday period that you could do work experience. She'll tell you whether that's suitable or not, or whether that's something we do or not. But in any event, that's where you get your information from per firm, because not everyone advertises online. And even if there is nothing at the end, at least she's met you, she's seen your face when something comes up. You never know what happens.
I agree. We recently, nearly 12 months ago now, employed a graduate solicitor. And we employed her because she'd done her PLT with our firm, and we were in my department. I was looking for someone to take on a reasonable amount of my workload, and we didn't advertise at all. We just offered her the position, which she took. But had she not done that, was it 16 weeks? It felt like a long time anyway that she was in our firm. We knew that she fitted within the culture of our firm. We knew what her strengths were, and we were very happy to offer her the position without doing any advertising at all.
Yeah, none of the firms I worked for ever advertised. They just got so many resumes, both for people looking to start, like do articles, or from solicitors, that they never advertised. And I think I sent out, from memory, hundreds and hundreds of resumes all over Queensland. I was prepared to move, and luckily there was one solicitor in Toowoomba who my resume caught his eye, and we caught up, and he gave him my articles. But most of them didn't even acknowledge you or get back to you, anything like that. It can be quite a struggle.
The position that I'm with now at Clifford Gilton Lawyers was never advertised. So we were in Brisbane and we knew we wanted to move back to Toowoomba. And I said I had only like 2 or 3 firms that I was sort of really seriously considering. And I'd actually, had no idea how I was going to go about it. There was no positions being advertised. And I emailed Ben Gilton and Danny Clifford directly, who were the 2 directors at the time. We now have a third one, Amanda Tolson. I only got their details. I've never met them or heard of them before, but they have quite a strong reputation in the construction industry, which, as I said before, is the area that I really love doing. So through researching the website, I obviously could pick who were the bosses. And so I drafted an email to them explaining to them my situation, who I was, what I was looking for. They didn't get back to me for about a week. I phoned Ben and just said, oh, Shanae, I sent you guys an email a couple of days or a week ago or whatever. Oh, yeah, Shanae, lovely. Well, we can make it this weekend. Do you want to come up on a Saturday for a coffee? So they ended up coming in on a Saturday to meet with me over a coffee just in the boardroom at the office. And it just so happened that their construction litigation lawyer was going on maternity leave in 2 months. So we worked it out perfectly. Now, guaranteed, had I not done that, I wouldn't have gotten that job. They actually said to me afterwards they were going to try and just cover it internally. But when I came across their desk, my level of experience and, I guess what they had to pay me, was just at the right level for them, because they wouldn't have wanted to replace someone full-time, I guess, at her level, because she was quite a senior solicitor. And so it was just by chance and, everything sort of just fit together perfectly. But had I not done that, I don't think that I would have gotten the job.
We're going to have to start wrapping it up shortly, but we'll just end with one last question. Yeah, if you like.
So the life of a lawyer is a hard one, but is it worth it?
I don't know that it's all particularly hard. I think the more that you are in the profession, the better you get at apportioning your time and your resources to enable you to do more things. At some stages, it looks like what another person is doing and what they're managing to fit into their schedule looks like something you will never be able to do. But that person didn't get to have those 5 or 6 interests all in one go. They took on one, and then they took on another, and then they managed those, and then they found they had a bit more and they could manipulate that time and to the point where after 10 years they've got quite a nice balance of outside interests, and they're doing nicely in their work. And so I don't think it's really harder than a lot of professionals have to balance.
Look, I think law's got its own individual challenges. Like I mentioned earlier, like I think a few of us here work in litigation. Litigation can get a bit depressing sometimes because people only come to see you when you have a problem. But if you like what you do, it doesn't affect you. And I think it is also, it's advantageous to have other interests other than just what you do, some type of social events or some type of sporting events. So you give yourself a little bit of time out. And also, I think it's very important that, come the end of the day, whatever type of hours you work, because some lawyers do work extremely long hours, but at the end of the day, you need to be able to flick a switch such that anything that happens during the day stays at work. And when you go home, you completely, cut off and you can talk about whatever. I think that's very important.
I think that, look, regardless of whether you enjoy being a solicitor or a barrister or you decide not to go down that track, there's a saying that if life is a game, then solicitors hold the rule book. And I think that having a law degree is a fantastic thing. It opens so many doors for you. You might end up working for government, you might end up working for a company or a university, or, as I said, a community legal service. If you're not the sort of person who wants to record everything they do in 6-minute lots throughout the day, if you're not the sort of person who wants to maybe do your traditional pathway, don't be despondent, because there's so many different pathways, and you will always have your law degree. You'll always take that knowledge with you, and it's just such a fantastic grounding to have in whatever job or career you decide to go into.
Yeah, look, I think I'm very similar to you in that my husband's a teacher, so when you ask me whether being a lawyer is difficult, I say hell yes when I look at his workload and the time that he has off and how easy he has it. And I often feel sorry for myself, and then he reminds me that it was my choice to study law and it's my choice to continue on in law. Look, it definitely has its challenges. It's full on, it's at a high pace. You do a lot of work, there's a lot of pressure. You've got professional responsibilities, you've got ethical responsibilities, you have client expectations that you have to manage. And I didn't even touch on anything legal in that sentence. So But is it worth it? For me, every day of the week, I really thoroughly enjoy it. But then in saying that, there are a lot of students that end up, working in a private practice and then changing. And so I think the statistics are something, and this is just drawing back to King and Mallison, their statistics are that from the 12 grads that start every year, by the first year, about 3 would have dropped off. And by year 4, there'd be only about 2 left. And I know personally for my graduate group, there's only 4 left. And it's 3.5 years later now. So look, and all of those, they didn't all drop out and on doing law. Some of them are in-house lawyers now at big firms, and they absolutely love that. Some of them are working for the government, for councils. But one thing that you can definitely rest assured is that the skills that you gain from not only, studying law and finishing your law degree, but then also working in law is absolutely invaluable, and it'll help you in any career you choose to take afterwards.
That's great. Thank you. And thank you so much to our panellists today for coming and speaking. It's just been so insightful to hear about your experiences and your career journeys and the opportunities that are available to students studying law. So thank you very much for coming. We do have certificates of appreciation for you, which I'll present.
Catherine, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's lovely. Thank you.